some news that came out earlier this week. We're doing this live on a Tuesday, and that the 9 conferences in the FBS and Notre Dame have come around to a new playoff deal that is going to pay them over 6 years, $7.88 billion. Now, a lot of moving and shaking on this one because first, we are extending the college football playoff to 12 teams in 2024 and 2025. Now, that's going to be a 5+7 model where the 5 highest ranked conference champions get automatic bids, and then the next 7 highest ranked teams get into the playoff. This is how you get your group of 5 highest ranked champion into the college football playoff on an automatic bid, because there are only 4 quote unquote power conferences now, but really there are just 2. And we're going to get to that in a little bit. But I think knowing that as the landscape is important. So as we go into this season of college football, pay attention to the 5 highest ranked conference champions and then who's coming after that, right? So if it's Liberty, for instance, who is the highest ranked conference champion of that group of 5, you can understand how they get into the college football playoff. It also makes room for Notre Dame, who's not going to play for a conference championship and probably could be one of the 7 highest ranked teams in the sport at any given time. Their deal with the ACC and NBC makes this much more interesting than I think it would otherwise be. But I'm going to get to that now, in that we're going to get 12 teams 2024, 2025. We could get to 14 teams by 2026. The thing about all of that is how much you're going to pay each one of the teams, each one of the conferences to play in the college football playoff, and how does that affect their bottom line? Gets to be interesting, right? So while we get the news of what the 9 conferences are going to be, right, plus Notre Dame, because there aren't 10 anymore. Remember that, Pac-12's gone, right? We also get to what does that mean for the bowl season, and what does that mean for the revenue share? So in the past, under the current college football playoff agreement, $460 million basically spread out among 80% going to the Power 5 and then the rest if you got in there. Now we are doing this thing where the college football playoff is going to reflect, or at least the revenue is going to reflect, how many times that you've had a team from your conference get in there. So the math works out that 58% of the $1.3 billion that is going to be available, right, in the next college football playoff extended year will go to the Big Ten and SEC. And the reason that is because they've had the most teams into the playoff. Full stop, right? 32% is going to go to the Big 12 ACC, about 17% going to the Big 12, about 15% going to the ACC, and then 10% going to Notre Dame and the G5, for which we expect Notre Dame would, well, get the bulk of that. I still think that it's in the G5's best interest to probably break off from this, and we're probably headed that way as we're heading toward conference realignment. Now, 73% of college football playoff participants have been Big Ten SEC teams, right? You get that. You also know that there are bowl game tie-ins for our New Year's Six. Those are probably going to go away. And this is interesting because you used to be able to count on money that you would get if you're the Big Ten or Pac-12, for instance, for the Rose Bowl in a year where it is not a part of the college football playoff rotation. Same thing with the Orange Bowl, same thing with the Sugar Bowl. That would go away under this new agreement. So the Rose Bowl, Sugar Bowl, Orange Bowl, provided they are not a part of the 12-team playoff, which is really difficult, 14-team playoff, difficult for me to see, they would be able to get whomever they want who isn't in that playoff to play in their respective games. I'm curious to see how that's going to go, because I'm also curious to see how the bowl system is going to work around this new extended playoff. But it is a thing to keep in mind as we talk about Clemson and Florida State and the ACC. So earlier today on Tuesday, Clemson filed suit against the ACC to try to exit the league without saying they wanted to exit the league. Now, the ACC is going to interpret that as you want to exit the league. So we are going to forcibly allow you to exit the league. First thing I thought of when I saw this was, what is Clemson trying to do? Well, they're mimicking Florida State. 2 of your best teams, the 2 best teams, if you're asking me, in the ACC no longer want to be a part of the ACC because they look at the money that they stand to make as ACC members and say, hey, no, we can't do this. We can't do this work for this much money. And the ACC is going, too bad, you signed a grant of rights agreement that runs through 2036. We are going to hold you to that. So both Florida State and Clemson are taking the ACC to court to find out if they can exit from the ACC with not paying the full amount that they would owe for exiting the ACC, which would be like $140 million. Now, for Clemson, they're referencing what Maryland did when they exited the ACC, where they ended up settling for about $31 million. What's interesting about that is Clemson wants to try to not only act as if it is sort of soft playing that they want to exit, but also would like to know, if we did, can we keep our TV rights? Which means that Clemson believes it can make a little bit more money as an independent than it could as a part of the ACC. I find this interesting because Clemson and Florida State basically want to join the SEC, right? We get it. I understand that. You understand that. It would also balance the SEC versus the Big Ten. And then we get to talk about our super conferences as being equally balanced. You know, Thanos with his little dagger talking into Gamora. And we get closer to the kind of future that I think we're going to have, where the Big Ten and the SEC basically monopolize the sport. And we'll find out what happens with the Big 12 and what's left of the ACC. But it is very clear that Jim Phillips and the ACC are not going to just take this laying down. However, another wrinkle in Clemson's complaint to file is their citing of Notre Dame. So Notre Dame is not really a part of the ACC, though they play a mostly ACC schedule. So the flavor of this is Notre Dame is contractually obligated to pay the same amount of damages if they wanted to leave the ACC as Clemson, who gets to play, for an ACC title. That doesn't seem to be the way it should work. But given what Notre Dame's TV deal is with NBC, you see how they can come up with this guerrilla math. I don't think that generating less revenue for the conference means that you should be paying the same amount as ACC or Florida State to exit. That said, I would look at this and go, wait a second. You're comparing yourselves to Notre Dame, who has an entirely different agreement with the ACC and an entirely different agreement with their television partner. No, that's what I would say. I would throw that argument against the wall and say, do better, Clemson. And they probably will. But I think for our purposes here, the takeaway is Clemson and Florida State want out of the ACC. I don't think the ACC want to keep them, given the hassle that it would be to try to. So this is going to come down to how much money are you going to have to pay the ACC, if you're Florida State and Clemson respectively, to leave the ACC, to which they would probably look at Oklahoma and Texas leaving the Big 12 to join the SEC. How much did that cost to leave, right? And then you take that money and you try to use it to build in a better league if you're the ACC that's probably on par with the Big 12, right? So you got your two super conferences in the Big 10, the SEC, and you got your new mid-majors that are the Big 12 and the ACC. And then you have your remaining 5 FBS conferences. I'm curious to see how this all shakes out, because I don't think that the money portends everybody being competitive for a college football playoff national championship. It's just not possible anymore. We're going to have teams making considerably more money once they get into the playoff than those that didn't. We're also going to have conferences that are going to be able to funnel more money to their respective programs, apart from how they do each and every year. So Rutgers and Vanderbilt stand to make more money than Oklahoma State and Kansas, given what the rights deals are. It's going to be difficult for Oklahoma State and Kansas to compete if they already know that they can go win 10, 11, 12 games, but not make the same amount of money as, say, Rutgers or Vanderbilt. And I just don't think that athletic directors are stupid enough to continue to let that happen. It's a long way of saying we got a long road to go here before we find out what our new college football landscape is going to look like. But at the bottom of all of this, with the playoff extensions, with Clemson and Florida State posturing to get out of the ACC, with the new SEC, with the new Big Ten, you should know everybody is trying to make as much money as they can, create as many revenue streams as they can, because they might have to actually pay damages to athletes for NIL deals that weren't coming into fruition in the past, and television revenue that they should have been sharing with their labor force in the past. We just don't know, right? Because these cases are still in court, notably Alston versus the NCAA. So while you and I just wanted to play, a college football video game produced by EA Sports, what the conference commissioners and athletic directors and presidents have to actually plan for is, what if they tell us that we owe money to people in the past that we should have been paying? Okay. You would need to take all this new money and find a different way to either distribute it or make more money from it. This is before we even get into how are we going to categorize, standardize, and regulate name, image, and likeness as it is for players, because right now it feels like a freshman is going to make a lot more money than a senior, and that's going to rub people the wrong way, to which I'm saying, hey, man, if you're talented and you can go get your money, go get your money. That is how the markets work. Now, I know that's a lot to unpack, but we're going to keep getting at this, and we're going to make this make sense as we continue to have to talk about it, as Clemson filing a complaint came out of nowhere, or is expected by some, but came out of nowhere for most people. Same thing with Florida State as they're working through the ACC. And as we get close to college football starting, we will probably put this down, pick it right back up in 2025, because, again, a 14-team playoff feels like it's coming. But what is that structure going to look like? We're going to keep up with it. We're going to be on it. For now, know that everybody is just trying to keep their part of the pie, and if they can, grow it just a little bit more to cover themselves for the future, because everybody would love to be a part of the college football playoff, and not everybody is going to be able to do that. If you like what you've seen, consider subscribing to the #1 college football show on YouTube, the Fox Sports app, or wherever you get your podcast.